Hey guys, this video is going to get into air pressure. During the video you should be able to understand what air pressure is and define it and also get the concept of what it is. You should also be able to compare and contrast high pressure and low pressure and the properties of each one. And what I mean by that is this, I don't want just a definition for what high pressure is or what low pressure is. I want you to be able to tell me a couple of the properties of each one. What makes them unique and different from each other? Alright, so let's go ahead and get into it.
Hey guys, I went for a bike ride the other day and I noticed that my bike was running a little bit sluggish, and it's because the tire felt a little flat. And so when I feel this though, it feels really firm, but I can see that it definitely has a little bit of give to it. So I think the air pressure is a little bit low. And what that means is the force of the air that's inside this tire is not pushing out on the tire as high as it should be. So I'm going to take this little gauge here, hook it up to the valve, push it down, check to see what's going on. Yeah, the tire pressure is only about 35. I need to increase that up to about 60 to 80. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to take my pump, hook it up. It's trickier to do with one hand than I thought. There we go. Now I'm going to add some air in here. So now let's think what's happening. As I'm pumping the air into the tire, I'm increasing the pressure inside the tire. Right now, the air that's floating around the tire when the air pressure is low is pretty uncompressed. And as I'm adding more air in here, it's getting a lot more crowded with air, or it's getting more compressed. It's kind of like our classroom. When there's a lot of people in there, it's pretty compressed. When there's not a lot of people, it's uncompressed. Well, the air is kind of doing the same thing. We have low pressure air, which is uncompressed, and high pressure air, which is very compressed. And as I feel, I just added a whole bunch more air into here. And that air is pushing out with a greater force. Not only is it pushing out this way, it's pushing out this way on the side and out this way on the side. It's even pressing down this way, but it doesn't inflate this way because of that steel rim right there. So I'm going to check the pressure, see how close I am. And now, there we go. Now it's to about 50. So I have about 10 more PSI to add in here before I'm ready for my ride.
Alright, take a look at these two columns of air. We have one that's high pressure and one that's low pressure. One that's compressed, one that's uncompressed. See if you can figure out really quickly which one's which. If you got that this is the high pressure air and that this is the low pressure air, you're absolutely right. How can you tell? Because all the little air molecules here are way compressed. There's a lot more of them. And over here, those air molecules are way more spread out. So that would be uncompressed or low pressure air. But there's another subtle difference in this diagram that I'm not sure if you picked up on. Notice that this guy here is blue and this guy here is kind of reddish. And what that's showing is temperature. The high compressed air, the high pressure air, tends to be a bit cooler. And the low pressure air tends to be a bit warmer. And something else that's really not on this diagram, but I'll give it to you now, is that cooler air tends to sink and that warmer air tends to rise. And what that is, that's because of its density. Cold air is much more dense and it tends to fall down to the ground, where warmer air is much less dense and it tends to rise. Think of a hot air balloon. When you take a hot air balloon and you fill it up with a whole bunch of warm air, it goes up into the atmosphere, and that's all because of its density. It becomes less dense than the air surrounding it, so it goes up into the atmosphere. Alright, these are all the properties that I wanted you guys to compare of high pressure versus low pressure. It would also be a really good idea in your notes to make a diagram of this. Okay, just a couple more things real quick. This is a barometer. A barometer is simply a tool that measures air pressure. You'll take a look at one in class. But when there's changes in air pressure, either towards high or towards low, this guy here will detect those changes and it will show you what those changes are on the device. But also, it kind of highlights a little bit about why we're talking about air pressure. Take a look at the barometer and specifically look at these little pictures that are right here in the middle of it. You know, one of the main reasons why we're talking about air pressure is because there's a direct relationship between air pressure and the weather that's outside. In fact, if you take a look at this weather map, you'll notice that there are H's and L's all over the place. And I'm sure you can guess that the H's stand for high pressures and the L stands for low pressure. So the point I'm trying to make is this, is there's a relationship between our daily weather and changes between high pressure and low pressure. And anytime you watch the news, one of the very first things they're going to talk about are these differences between high pressure and low pressure. And also, here's a little tip for you. Take a look at the H's and the L's on the map. You'll notice that the H's are blue, indicating that it's cooler air, and the L's are always red, and it's showing that it's warmer air. It's kind of a way to kind of help you remember which one's warmer and which one's cooler. Alright guys, during this video you learned a little bit about what air pressure is, so you should be able to define what air pressure is, define high pressure, define low pressure, and earlier I talked about the properties of high pressure and low pressure, so you should be able to tell me which one's compressed, which one's uncompressed. And I also want you to come up with your own analogy for what high pressure and low pressure is. And what I mean by that is, earlier in the video, I made the analogy of our classroom when it's really full, that's kind of like compressed because there's a lot of people there, so that'd be like high pressure. And when there's not a lot of people there, that would be uncompressed because there's not a lot of people moving around. So I want you to come up with your own analogy for high pressure versus low pressure that's different from the one that I came up with. If you have any questions, please feel free to email me or talk to me about it at the beginning of class.